So again, to start off today's conversation, we're going to discuss what are tech companies doing. Okay, so first and foremost, we will discuss Google mobility trends. That's what we're going to discuss right now. I'll give you guys about 3 minutes to find it and then fill out this response and then research and or find out what else are these tech companies up to. Now, don't give me the whole, oh, Apple's donating masks and Facebook is donating masks. Talk to me about their platforms, okay? Talk to me about what are big tech companies doing to help businesses or users with their tech. All right, so I don't care what they're doing with their money. I don't care what they're doing with donations. I don't care what they're doing with, paying their employees. Nobody cares about that. What I want to know is, why did Google create this Google Mobility Trends platform? And what are other tech companies doing at a time like this? Okay, what are they doing at a crazy time like this? I'll give you guys about 2 more minutes till 11:35 to start this research. Obviously, this will not be your full do now. You'll probably have quite a bit more you'll have to add to it because I'm not going to give you forever to get it done, but it should be enough to jumpstart the starting point for your do now. All right, 2 minutes. Go. Okay, let's get started. I don't want to take up too much more time on this. So I'm going to allow you guys to control whether you mute or off mute. What'd you find? What is Google Mobility Trends?
So the Google Mobility Trends, they're basically a system or a list of places in the world where each pinpoint policies made to combat the coronavirus.
Okay. Go ahead.
They use location, geography, and landscaping as well, especially politics, and combine them together like analytical graphs and stuff.
Okay, so let's take a look at Italy. Let's take a look at mobility changes in Italy versus mobility changes in, let's do New York. So, retail and recreation So mobility trends for restaurants, cafes, shopping centers, theme parks. Down 62% since February 16th, right? So it's got a baseline down 62%. Italy is down 94%. Down 85% in groceries, 90 in parks, 32 in groceries, 47 in parks. Okay, so you can kind of compare and contrast some of their policies versus what the people, I guess, might be doing. 68, 46, plus 16%, 87, 63, plus 24. So the plus, I'm assuming, means the amount of time people are at home or heading home, or the amount of time that their geolocators are activated at home. Okay, so they're definitely spending an increased amount of time at home, and then it actually gives you a full global in the PDF also. So everywhere else in the world. All right. So what you're seeing here, if we do New York, you can check every county in New York. If you're in Florida, you can check every county in Florida. If you're in Italy, like in this one, you can check every county in Italy and compare. Why might this be useful, or is this useless? Anybody? Useful or useless? Clever but useless, or actually useful? Anybody?
I think it could be pretty useful.
Why?
If you look at mobility trends, it could basically show you how serious other countries or other counties are taking like quarantine.
Okay.
Like for New York or whatever, if you go to parks, it was like up like 80% for like the past few days or something.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like down by like 50 or 60 or something. It could help you show policies and stuff. And in other countries, some of the trends they haven't changed, and there's no policy making them stay in.
Right. So it's interesting. Let's take a look at Florida, because Florida seems to be having the most issue with people doing what they're told. Right. So if you notice, New York started. This is Sunday, March 8th. Is around where we started. They definitely started a bit later. They're down 50%. We're down 62%. They're down 26% in groceries. We're down 32%. So you can see some states got a later start to the declines. Transit stations, 63. Transit stations, New York is 68. Okay. So this is interesting data. How economists use this, or how the government uses this, I'm not really sure yet. It's just tracking our mobility, right? Our movement location to location. So I'm interested to see where they might actually utilize this information. I think it's interesting because there are companies like Google that are working to try to find out what other data can they get at a time like this that might help people. Right? So this is some form of data. Then the other question was, what are other companies doing?
I found that IBM and the Weather Channel created an online dashboard that shows reported local COVID cases so that individuals and businesses can see how widespread the virus is near them.
Great. So now you're finding businesses that are trying to find out how widespread is it. So you have companies that are partnering up, like an IBM and a Weather Channel, trying to help you determine. I know Google did one where they were trying to help you figure out, well, where's the closest place to get tested. Okay. Anybody else? Anything else that you found? Facebook was doing certain things, so was Apple.
Apple released a screening tool.
Can't hear whoever's talking.
I said Apple released a screening tool.
Yeah, so they released a screening tool. You want to talk a little bit more about what that is?
Basically it's like it's all anonymous. They won't like tell anyone anything, but it gives you tips on what to do just in case if you are sick. Like I'm looking at some of their steps, and sometimes they say contact healthcare provider or you should self-isolate yourself.
Yeah, so they're trying to provide, since people love Apple so much, people think that they'll trust Apple during this process, probably over a news organization. So what they're doing is they're creating a platform for you to just get some information on what you personally should do. I think it's great. A lot of these businesses are trying to do something with their tech that helps. Why? Now, why are you seeing this with major tech companies? Why do you think this is actually important?
I think it's obvious that like everybody's suffering as well as tech companies, although they're not as much. But like as soon as like the economy gets like better, they benefit from that as well. So they're just trying to help the cause. So at the end, they make money off of it.
Smart. Would definitely co-sign that statement. That if they get you to use their platforms and trust them now, then you'll trust them and use them in the future. What else?
I think there's also like a humane aspect within these companies. When you see like all the resources that Apple and IBM and the Weather Channel have, they obviously want to use those resources to help like their consumers with their lives and try to like, I guess, like help people survive during this pandemic.
Yeah, definitely good. Helping people survive, helping people to improve their quality of life. Definitely. Daniel said good PR. Can anybody talk to me a little bit more about PR? I'm going to go with the conspiracy theory, good PR thing. Anybody want to share a little bit more on that with me? What did we talk about a lot in the beginning of the year with these big tech companies?
Oh, like whether they had too much data about us?
Whether they had too much data. Yes, definitely. Who are the big tech? Like, give me the big, like, 5 or 6 horsemen that run the show. So I'll go first. Apple, right?
Google.
It's my favorite stock no matter what. So Apple, who else?
Google.
Facebook.
So Alphabet, Facebook, Prasanga wrote Microsoft, that's 4.
Amazon.
Amazon, William, that's 5. So we've got Apple, Google, which is the Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft. I wouldn't put NVIDIA in there. NVIDIA's
Disney.
You could put Disney. Disney's not necessarily a tech company, but so I'm looking at large businesses that are being looked at by the government that they wanted to break them up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They wanted to break up Amazon. Oh, Amazon's too big. Apple's too big. Google's too big. And now what are they saying? Oh, Apple, Google, Amazon, help us. So by creating certain tools, you actually find yourselves in a situation where maybe this kind of puts those big, large companies, even a Disney, into the good sites of politicians where they don't want to break up the Apples or Googles or Amazons, because you see that their sheer size and power is what can help the current situation, right? That if you broke up Amazon and they didn't have the resources and warehouses and the money to invest, would that be an issue for the economy? So I think what you're seeing is that maybe they're doing some of this because it can be a huge plus for them down the road when talking to a lot of these politicians. That's just me. That's my conspiracy theory. So Today, I want to discuss quantitative easing briefly. First, what I do want to show you guys is I did extend the deadline for your corporate debt assignment to April 12th rather than April 10th. So I did extend it by 2 days. I extended it for 2 reasons. One, because since you were just providing me with your hypothesis today and yesterday, and I was helping you guys tweak some of them, you might, even if you started today, that would only give you 4 days to fine tune it, right? So I'll extend it 2 days. I'm extending it to April 12th for you guys. So part 1 was already due over the weekend. Part 2 is due today by midnight. If you do it after 11:59, it's considered late. So please do not edit your submission. Same thing with anything else. And then the actual presentation itself will be due April 12th. If you've already started it, great. You'll get a little bit of a head start. If you did not start it, then you do have a little bit of an extra time frame. One of the things I wanted to discuss prior to many of you starting it is my concern with a lot of your theses. Most of you, for lack of a better way to put it, have the same hypothesis. Unemployment's going to go up. Companies are going to go bankrupt. The economy's not going to do well. Like 37 times out of the 60 presentations that we'll be looking at. So what I'm going to do right now is challenge you guys to think a little differently. So the issue I'm having is that you guys read, which is great, you read these 2 statements, and then your thought process stopped. So we've discussed mortgage-backed securities. We've now discussed credit default swaps. We've discussed the Fed buying bonds and bad debt. We've discussed junk bonds. We've discussed corporate debt. We've discussed personal debt. We've discussed credit card debt. We've discussed student loan debt. We've discussed people buying houses that they can't afford and their personal mortgage debt. However, the majority of the hypotheses that you guys have submitted to me only address what Goldman Sachs or the Fed said. So I'm going to challenge you guys over the next few hours to think outside the box, right? You don't have to stay within the confines of Goldman Sachs and the Federal Reserve. I even gave you guys a great Easter egg here that this was from April 2019. I couldn't even get one of you guys to challenge that if Goldman Sachs says that risky corporate debt reached its peak and was a threat in April 2019, I could not even get a hypothesis from any of you that compares risky corporate debt from 2019 to risky corporate debt in April of 2020. I couldn't get anything about the Federal Reserve saying corporate debt is not a risk in 2019. Well, if it wasn't a risk in 2019 when federal funds rates were at 2%, could corporate debt be a risk now in April 2020 where the federal funds rate is at 0? So maybe your whole presentation is about the federal funds rate, right? So I gave you guys 2 key statements, and you guys had the ability to kind of venture in any direction you wanted. All of you kind of are in the same exact hypothesis, okay? So I'm going to challenge you guys to think a little bit further outside the box. I spoke with Chris Liu of New Apps this morning. He is actually going to take the opposite side of both of these, And he's going to say that corporate debt actually is going to theoretically be a great opportunity for investing in the stock market. That companies with healthy debt are going to be the strongest businesses in the next 6 and 12 months. That although other companies will face difficult times, the greatest investments are still available if they have limited bad debt and healthy debt and have a good credit rating. Right? So these are different ways you can look at it. There's another student in one of the classes that I spoke with, and I'm waiting to see if they do it. No one's confirmed it with me if they decide they want to do it or not, so I leave it up to you guys if you want to try to take another spin on this as well. Could corporate debt save the global economy? So is it not a risk? And is it not only not a risk, but is corporate debt going to save the global economy? Because corporate debt will allow businesses to continue to hire, continue to do research and development, continue to develop new products and new ideas, and then actually help the economy improve and help individual employees stay on their feet. Or do you take the side of Goldman Sachs and say, yes, risky corporate debt is a threat. However, the biggest threat is individual debt, your credit card debt. And then your whole presentation's on credit card debt and the increased credit card debt and what you predict unemployment will do. Or will risky corporate debt cause unemployment, which will cause an increase in individual debt, which will then cause the collapse of the credit market because people can't pay back their individual credit card debt and they're going to live the next 6 months on their credit card because they don't have money saved. And then you can address the entire issue of saving. So what I'm trying to say is that most of you read these two statements and you took those two statements and that is where your thinking stopped. Okay? At this point, I'd like you to re-engage your thought process and think deeper. A lot of you guys I told think deeper. Otherwise, you're going to be, one, extremely bored doing this assignment, and two, you're way too generic and spread out, overgeneralized. So if you're way too overgeneralized, you're not even going to be able to find enough data to back you up because your idea is too broad, if that makes sense. So you would need to hone this and be much, much more specific. So William Fryer from New Apps, he's tackling student loan debt. And his thesis, which he's still reworking, is more or less that the mortgage-backed security bubble popped in 2008, and that's what caused the global crisis in 2008. And that 2020 will pop the student loan debt bubble, and that will cause the next crisis through 2020 and 2021. So he will have to draw parallels between mortgage-backed securities and student loan debt, which financial companies or banks are exposed to student loan debt the most, and which were exposed the most to mortgage-backed securities, right? Which will have the bigger impact on the consumer, and then what's the trickle-down effect from there? And what does the bubble popping mean? Does the Fed need to now print more money and actually pay off student debt? Or is the student debt so spread out and so broad-based to so many people that the bubble's not really going to actually end up popping after all? and this person's got $50,000 of debt, and this person has $15,000, and this person has $80,000, and all the Fed needs to do is freeze interest rate payments, and then people can end up paying off their debt over time. And there's actually no crisis that will come from this. Okay? So the opportunity is there for you guys to really take these ideas in a different location. But I do want to reiterate the formatting. So let's say you have your hypothesis, right? Williams' hypothesis, the student loan debt bubble is going to burst and cause the next great crisis. We are not in the next great crisis yet. The next crisis is going to be from student loan debt. Then he does his research, right? And after all of this research and all of his information is done, then he gets to his final thesis. Was he correct? That's the question. Was he correct? So I want you guys to avoid this consistency bias. All right? Information bias, selection bias, whatever you guys want to call it. What consistency bias is that you basically, your present attitude or behavior or thought process, the information you find, you look for information that supports your point of view. I don't want you to do that. Look for information. Then present the information and then find out at the very end, was your hypothesis correct or incorrect? Does your opinion now change or not? Okay, so try to avoid the consistency bias. There will be some, because you do have to look for some specific information, but perhaps the information you find is not exactly what you thought you would find. That doesn't mean don't showcase it. Okay, I don't want you to think that means don't showcase it. What I want you to do is then, if you need to change your thesis at the very end, change your thesis. I had a hypothesis. I was under the assumption this was going to be what happens. Based on all of this information we found, here's my new thesis. Student loan debt isn't actually a high risk because XYZ happened, or we researched and found this, or this is the situation that we're now finding ourselves in. Okay, are there any questions on that, whether it's about your thesis or about the consistency bias I'm trying to have you guys avoid? All right, so I do want you to avoid just looking for a way to prove your point. I'd love, maybe some of you guys are wrong. Maybe some of you guys are right. It'd be interesting to see if some of you guys are actually wrong after you do some of this research. Okay, you guys already can unmute yourselves. Any questions?
Yeah, how would you like to see the 1 or 2 slides of a minimum of 4 to 5 terms in the presentation?
It could just be a definition.
Okay.
Right, so if you're using new terms, right, so some of the terms that we have here could be some of those terms. But while you're researching, I'm pretty sure, depending on your perspective, right, and depending on how in-depth you go, you'll start uncovering new terminology and new theories and new data sets that you might have to explain, right? Like if you're using a quantitative or qualitative analysis, or you're using Google's Trends platform, maybe you have to define what is this Google Trends platform, right? If that's part of your information in your presentation. So it would really just be 2 slides of 1 to 2 slides of defining specific terminology that you found that was in, or maybe it shouldn't be this late. Maybe this should be moved after your hypothesis. That way, when I'm reading through your presentations, I will read your hypothesis, then read all of the new terms, and then see your slides. Right? So do your whole research piece first, do your slides, and then maybe we'll just slide your slides to the front with the definitions. That way I know what I'm reading and I know the definitions before I start looking at all your data. Supply chains. I had a student ask me earlier, can they do their presentation on supply chains? And will supply chains change? Right? And will corporate debt that was caused by this crisis, will corporate debt force people and companies to change their supply chains in order to avoid a future economic issue if there's another global issue? And instead of using a much longer-winded supply chain, do they try to own their supply chain? Right? Does Home Depot stop using other companies' trucks and develop a trucking company itself? Does a company such as Apple start moving manufacturing out of Asia so it's easier to control that ecosystem and the logistics, and then move more of their work into Canada and Mexico and South America, Central America? And then it's more expensive, but then it does mitigate risk in the future. Or does it just force them to have a better home base in Asia and be more involved in Asia to make sure there isn't a risk in the future? So you guys can even go, but you can talk supply chains. There's such a broader way you guys can tackle this rather than just saying, yes, risky corporate debt is an issue and corporate debt is not an issue. All right, so other questions, other thoughts before we move on?
Mr. Power, for the slides, is it a maximum of 12 slides for everything, or is it a maximum of 12 slides just for your data?
Just for this piece.
Okay.
So you have 1 cover slide page, 1 hypothesis slide, 6 to 12 of your data. So I don't want 5 slides of data because that's not going to be enough. And I don't want 15 slides of data because then you're just lumping in any information you can find. Okay, so it'd be between 6 and 12. So whether you can explain your data in 6 or 10 slides, I kind of leave up to you. But since you're not actually standing there to present it, you'll probably need more than 6 slides. Because if you need 5 to 10 data points, assume you're doing 1 data point per slide. Because you also have to have bullets next to the data point or a chart or a graph to explain it. Right? Because you're going to have to be able to explain this data point to me. Since you're not able to stand there and present it to the class, you're going to have to be able to explain this data point, which means each data point will more than likely take up 1 slide. Then you'll have 1 to 2 with your terms, 1 full slide for your MLA formatted citations, and then 1 with your final thesis. So after all of this, what is your final thesis? Were you right? Were you wrong? What is your final findings? So altogether, you're looking at 1, 2, maybe 10. That puts you at 12, 13, 14, 15. You're probably looking at maybe about 15 slides altogether around. Frida, does that help?
Oh yeah, it does. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Good. Other questions? Emery, Daniel, questions? Shannon, Sheik. Nobody. Nada.
I have a question.
All right. Speak a little louder.
Sorry. I have a question. So about the thesis in general, you want us to, well, not trying to think within the thesis, but or the statement it says, but rather outside of it. More like basically thinking what we learned from corporate debt and trying to incorporate it to a hypothesis, basically.
Well, you can use just these two phrases and turn that into a hypothesis. Or you can just look at these two phrases as the springboard for your idea.
Okay.
Right? So you can take risky corporate debt, specifically C-level bonds, is the biggest threat to the economy. So you're not even talking about general corporate debt like Goldman Sachs. You're not even talking all risky debt like Goldman Sachs, like the Federal Reserve, and then risky corporate debt like Goldman Sachs. You're talking specifically C junk rated bonds.
Okay.
Maybe risky corporate debt isn't even junk bonds. Maybe it's just companies taking out loans that are leveraged. I think I only got one thesis that was about leveraged loans. And that's probably because the word leveraged loans wasn't in the two headlines. Right? So these are your springboard to start thinking about corporate debt or debt. What I wanted to do here is show you guys that Goldman Sachs has one thought. The Federal Reserve had a separate thought all the way back in 2019, in April. Today, is that different? Or do you acknowledge all of this and you have a completely separate thought on what's happening with debt or with an economic downturn or what would cause an economic downturn? Is there something else that's a bigger threat to the economy? So remember, kind of like when we do our Toastmasters in class, I can tell you or give you and provide you with a topic. You can take that topic anywhere you want. I can tell you, convince me why drinking coffee in the morning is the best way to start your day. And you can either tell me it is a great way to start your day, it's not a great way to start your day, that actually coffee is not the best way to start your day, or that coffee should be drank at night if you work late at night, and you shouldn't be drinking coffee in the morning if you're trying to sleep because you work the night shift. So you can take any of these ideas and completely flip them upside down on their heads. But I'm not going to force you guys to do that. So as of right now, I'd say about 60% of you have the same exact thesis. If you're okay with that, then fine. I'm okay with it. I mean, I'm going to use the same rubric for everybody anyway. But if you're not in love with your thesis, or you don't effectively really look at your thesis and think, wow, this is powerful stuff, then maybe you should go back to the drawing board of your thesis and think a little bit more specifically, or think more dynamically, away from, the Federal Reserve and Goldman Sachs of the world, and maybe go with the opposite thought process, right? Think, is risky corporate debt a great investment? Why? Because the Fed's buying bad debt. If the Fed is buying bad debt, then these companies aren't going to go bankrupt. That bad debt might be a great asset to hold because you're definitely going to get your interest. And you're telling Goldman Sachs you're wrong. It is not a threat to the economy. It's actually a great asset to own and be profitable on. All right? So that's what I'm looking for. So keep what you want if you want to keep what you want. Change it if you want to change it. You have to text it to me. So you guys all have my number. I'll type it in here again anyway. text it to me. That's the fastest way to get to me. You have to upload it, obviously, under the April 6th assignment to get a grade. But in order to get me to give you that feedback, you should text me as soon as possible if you haven't already. And if you want to change it, you can message me again. I got nothing else to do today. All right. Any questions on that before I talk to you briefly about quantitative easing and then let you guys go? Great. So if you remember, when we were talking about bonds back in the day, the bond market competes with who?
The stock market.
Yep. So you've got two factions. The bond market versus the stock market. Now, when bond prices go up, right? When stock prices increase, what happens to bonds? So stock values increase. You're saying bond values increase. Okay? Now, there's two things that you have to consider when looking at stocks and bonds. Okay? It's actually not about those prices increasing. It's about your yield. Okay? So, there's your balance. You have your bond price on one side. And what do you have on the other side? Your bond
Yield.
yield. Thank you. Okay? If this is the relationship, then this means that prices go up and the yield goes where?
Down.
Down. This would mean the opposite. Bond prices go down. Where's the yield go?
Up.
Up. That's the relationship. This is the supply and demand relationship of how bond prices impact bond yields. Now, the bond price here is down. The yield is up. Okay, on this one. Which of these is a strong, healthy stock market? Which one? 1, 2, or 3? Which of these do you think is a strong, healthy economy / stock market? Don't all, vote at once. What do you got? William said 1. Go ahead, type it in. William said 1. Ethan said 3. James, good. I want to hear from James. James, why 1? Why is 1 a healthy economy?
I just thought it's better than 3 because that's saying higher bond prices equals lower yield, and that's saying you're paying a high price for a low risk for a low reward. While as for 2, it's saying a normal bond price for a normal yield. That's also not really normal as compared to 1, which is saying with a low bond price you get a higher. You're basically paying for a higher yield in return. So that's why I think 1 is better than all of the other 2.
Okay, low price, high yield. This is your healthier economy. Well said, James. This is your healthier economy. Okay? You're looking to get a better yield, right? Which also in turn fights the stock market. So a higher yield They have to convince you to buy bonds instead of stocks in a healthy economy. So how do you do that? Lower bond prices, increase the bond yield. That's the relationship. And then it's this versus owning stocks. The opposite is true in a bad economy. Bond prices go up and bond yields go down because there's no point in owning stocks in a crappy economy. Right? Today the market's up 6%. Are we in a bad economy? Who knows? There's people dying left and right. I couldn't tell you what's happening in the stock market because it seems kind of crazy to me. I sold a bunch of stocks 2 weeks ago and the market's still going up. Can't figure it out. Still hold a bunch, so I'm happy. But I was hoping to buy some more at a lower price. But again, in a slowing economy, over time, bond prices go up, bond yields go down because stocks aren't that attractive, which means you can raise the prices of your bonds and lower the return. This is quantitative easing now. So now that you had your little, what's a better way to put it? Your refresher on stocks and bonds, there's quantitative easing. Here's your chart. So allow me to extend. All right. Now, the central bank, the Fed, prints money, as usual. They use this money. This is QE. In 2018, you did QE1, QE2, QE3, QE4, right? It's the Fed just printing money to buy debt. Well, the Fed buys bonds from financial institutions. Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, blah, blah, blah. Okay? The Fed buys bad debt. This increases liquidity because the Fed now owns the debt no one else wanted. Okay? That reduces interest rates. Because in a bad economy, right, low interest rates create more growth. So the Fed pumps money into the markets. By pumping money, you increase supply. Right? If you increase money supply, you therefore would decrease interest rates, which the Fed hopes leads to more businesses growing, taking out more debt on top of that debt to create more jobs and boost the economy. That's their goal. Let's buy more debt, reduce interest rates, right? So if they buy these bonds, like look right here. So if the Fed's in here buying these bonds, driving the price of bonds up, it would drive the return and interest rates lower. So the Fed prints money, buys debt, drives interest rates lower, right? It's increasing money supply. It's buying all of this bad debt. In buying the bad debt, it's increasing the demand of that debt that they were purchasing. Therefore, the prices of these bonds go up. Therefore, the yield or the interest goes down. All in all, impacting businesses and hoping businesses borrow more. That's the goal of quantitative easing. Basically, take all your mortgage-backed securities, take all your collateralized loan obligations and junk debt, and the Fed comes in and they buy all that bad debt. Don't fight the Federal Reserve. They can just print money. That's the thought. Okay? Now, I know you guys have another class to get to. I did want to briefly touch on that. Quantitative easing is definitely a topic you guys can dive into if you would like to for this assignment. Would you consider what they're doing now quantitative easing? Maybe. They're not calling it that. Ethan Hand, yes.
So about quantitative easing, I researched how it work. So as they use the reduced interest rates to make businesses grow to boost the economy, right?
Yeah.
Does the money from financial institutions go back in?
What do you mean does the money go back in?
So is it that I'm not sure if it's the right way to put it, but the people put their money in their savings, and from the bank they give it to low interest rates to businesses for expenses and for furniture and for stuff like that for the business, and then it goes back to the financial institution as I'm not sure what it is, but and then it goes back to their savings.
Whoa. Wait, how'd you get all the way to savings? You gotta have to say that again. Sorry, you lost me.
Actually, I think never mind. Sorry, wrong topic. That was from the homework that I read. I'm sorry, I mixed it up.
All right. If you guys have to go, you can go. I'll stay on a few more minutes. We'll record and post this, obviously. Shannon did have a question. How does quantitative easing impact the yield curve? Wow, great question. Okay, so let's check out some yield curves. All right. So if we're looking at, let's say, here's where we are. Okay. So we started to get an inverted yield curve, right? The Fed wants to round out the yield curve. Okay. So you have short-term debt and long-term debt. Right, Shannon? So you have treasuries and short-term and long-term bonds. Right? The goal is that, see how it drives down short-term bond prices? And then because the Fed's buying all of this debt, right? What you then start to see is the further out yield curve starts turning up into a normal growth yield curve from inverting. So you're currently inverted right now. This is all bad. So right here, everything you're looking at right here is all bad. Right? Lower returns, lower returns, lower returns. Nobody wants bonds, lower returns. Nobody wants anything, lower returns. Then all of a sudden, you start to see an increase in longer term, 7-year and 10-year treasuries, right? U.S. Treasury debt, U.S. Treasury bonds. You start to see an increase in the yield. Because the assumption will be that you hold these bonds for this long because the economy is going to start getting stronger. So that's why you have lower yield returns during this time frame. And then you start to see the bond yield get higher further down the line. So it does have a drastic effect on the yield curve. Shorter term like what you see here, you probably see and predict a short-term drop in yield and then a longer-term recovery in your yield. Now, why? Shannon, why don't you put together that for your presentation? What if you were to do, does the Fed buying $4 trillion in bad debt and pumping the $4 trillion into the market, will that impact the yield curve and therefore help re-spur spending and growth of the economy? That's the goal. Does it work is the question. Right? So it is going to force yields to initially fall. So just like the chart that we had, right? The Fed, the price of bonds will go up because the Fed's been buying bonds. So it's reducing the supply of bonds. So prices of these bonds will go up because they're buying them, causing the yield of these bonds to fall. So you'll start to see an initial dip in the yield. And then there's your point where things change. Right there. You're charging so little for interest that the bonds are giving such a low yield as well. But if you see longer term growth in the economy, you will then also begin to see the yield increase here as they predict the economy starts to improve. So Shannon, one thing that you can do, your thesis could be, will quantitative easing have a longer term impact on interest rates? Right? Will quantitative easing be what brings the US out of this risk like in 2008, 2009? Now, again, you don't have to, right? Just a thought, because it was a good question.
Mr. Power,
What's up, Frida?
what if it doesn't work and it just causes like stagflation, where you have like higher inflation and then like lower and then higher unemployment at the same time?
Well, there's your issue. So you don't know if this works. This is based on a model, right? Just like the same model that told Goldman Sachs to keep taking out debt. It's a model. They project what they think will happen, and they sure as hell hope they're right. The Fed has a projection. They sure as hell hope that they're right. It could lead to stagflation. It could lead to hyperinflation, which is Tyler's thesis, that the Fed pumping money into the markets will create hyperinflation, that businesses are actually going to overspend, and the oversupply of money is going to cause a problem, which will cause hyperinflation in the United States. I think he's wrong, because I think you're still going to get a lot of layoffs. Therefore, you're going to have people that reduce spending, even though you have a lot of debt. You'll get reductions in spending, so that'll kind of balance each other out. You won't get hyperinflation. So that's what Tyler in New Apps predicts. but you may get stagflation and you might not get good growth. You definitely might get a situation where all of this debt that the Fed is buying doesn't improve the financial situation of a lot of these companies. Because you can buy all the debt you want, it doesn't mean that these businesses are still going to be successful. They could still default on that debt. And instead of banks having the debt, the Federal Reserve now has the debt. Big difference. The company can still end up not being able to pay off their debt. Right? Uber could still go bankrupt even though the Fed has their debt instead of Citibank having their debt. That can still happen. Was that a little bit too negative of an outlook for you, Frida? What do you think?
I think it might happen. Like, it's possible because we don't know like what the future would hold right now.
That's true. That's why Trump is very eager to get the markets back open, right? The economy back open to try to avoid some of these risks because you don't know what's going to happen. It's possible. How about this? Some of you guys could do a thesis. If the Fed was buying debt in the Great Depression in the 30s, would the Great Depression have lasted a shorter period of time? There's a crazy idea. Then you can compare what the Fed did in 08 to what the Fed's doing right now and say, hey, why didn't the Fed, maybe the Fed could have done this back in the 30s, in the late 20s into the 30s. All right, but at the root of it, quantitative easing should increase prices of bonds, decrease interest rates, okay? And then therefore, hopefully, if they can reduce short-term interest rates right here, they can hopefully increase longer-term interest rates, spurring some growth. So if you can keep short-term interest rates low and long-term interest rates higher, you then have a yield curve that's going up like this, which is healthy. Okay, so you come down, you come up, and now you're exactly where you want to be, right here. Okay, any other thoughts before I let you guys dip out of here? Please get me your theses so I can vet them.
I have 2 theses. Can I like send them to you and then you decide like which one's better?
Yeah, send them both, definitely. If you guys have multiple ones, hell yeah, send them over. Let's have a conversation about it. That'd be great. All right, that goes for everybody. So text them to me. It's the fastest way to get them to me. And once we edit them, right, and take a look at them, then you guys can go about your business and trying to put them onto the corporate debt part 2 assignment. And then you guys can actually start the actual presentation itself. All right. Okay, guys, I'm going to shut it down. If you guys need me, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I will upload this posting of the recording. And then I'll see you guys mañana. Okay? Okay, I assume it's a good thing. All right, guys, bye.